Hello, everyone. It is Friday, not a day that I typically stream, but I am so glad that I could do this today because I would have gone nuts had I only been able to stream once this week. Because after last stream, I don't know what it was. It wasn't like we were on that big of a cliffhanger, but I was just like, I need to know what happens, like now. And I had to stop myself from like looking ahead to just like the first page of the next chapter. I was like, no, I'm not allowed to do that. I can't do that. Um so yeah, how are y'all doing today? We are reading chapters 77 to 80. Please give the stream a like. And I am so looking forward to whatever shenanigans we're about to get into. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also scared. Because I think I said last time I don't deal well with secondhand embarrassment. And I am worried that Yu is about to do something that's going to make me feel that. But I'm also excited to find out what the heck that is. Hi, Psykeen. Hi, Henry. Hi, Sua. And we are here on an interesting chapter title. The last one was Nice Going, Young Master Chen. And the chapter we're starting on today, chapter 77 on page 263, is Nice Going, Cuz. I don't know who Cuz is in this situation. If we're calling Chenmon that, or someone else, I don't know, but I guess we're going to find out. Chenmon could tell his tone was hostile, but he had no idea why. You're mistaken. Xiege isn't my personal physician, he said, frowning slightly. He's always been my friend. Yu smiled, his eyes cold as ice. He didn't speak a word in response. Chenmon continued looking at him in confusion. If I remember correctly, you're Xiege's friend as well. Yu's smile became even more gently refined. In truth, he was racked by torment, and desperately wanted to drag Xie Qingcheng over, shove him against the wall, and vindictively kiss him before Chenmon's very eyes, to defile Xie Qingcheng as everyone watched. However, wounded by how Xie Qingcheng had treated him, his pride didn't allow him to act that way in the presence of others. Well, good, I guess. In fact, he seemed exceedingly indifferent. He spoke with slight disdain. Surely you're joking. He and I merely have a working relationship. With Hu Yi present, there was no way for the three of them to say much more, so they all returned to their rooms with their own thoughts weighing on their minds. However, upon reaching his room, Yu could contain himself no longer. He sat on the sofa for a while, spacing out, but he still couldn't cast off the gloom in his heart. In the end, he went downstairs and bought himself a pack of smokes, Marlboro, the brand that Xie Qingcheng had been smoking recently. He started smoking because of him? Standing by the road, Yu held his cigarette in a slender hand and slowly finished smoking it in its entirety, his comportment graceful yet twisted as his eyes flickered in the lit end's glow. Upon returning to the hotel, he contacted the production assistant, intending to switch his room to the one next door to Chenmon and Xie Qingcheng. As it turns out, my room is too close to the generators. I can't sleep. The assistant didn't dare to be remiss, and promptly helped He Laoban switch rooms with no fuss at all. However, Yu still found this to be inadequate. He looked over the room's layout, then hauled the bed across the floor and shoved it up against the wall that he shared with Xie Qingcheng's room. Then he collapsed on the bed and closed his eyes, giving in to his darker emotions as he bit and gnawed at his own body. Sometime later, he finally picked up his cell phone and gave Xie Qingcheng a call. The hotel's soundproofing wasn't great. Lying against the wall, He Yu could vaguely make out the sound of Xie Qingcheng's phone ringing incessantly in the neighboring room. It was even accompanied by Chen Man's voice. "Ge, your phone." Then he heard Xie Qingcheng's voice. It was a bit distant, but very cold and calm. He Yu couldn't quite tell what he said, but it was evident that in the end, he didn't answer the call. He didn't answer, so He Yu tried again. "Ge, he's calling again." Henry, I was also just thinking about Volume 4, Ron 1. Slightly different scenario this time, but like, yeah. Still, Xie Qingcheng did not answer. After the third call, He Yu finally heard Xie Qingcheng's footsteps draw closer. This time, the call went through. He Yu was just about to speak, but Xie Qingcheng simply muted his phone's speaker so he didn't need to listen to He Yu's voice, then tossed the cell phone right next to the television. Yesterday, Municipal Party Secretary X visited a nursing home in X district to pay a call to the lonely senior citizens in the area. He Yu was at a loss for words. It seemed Xie Qingcheng intended to make him listen to an entire night's worth of news, in hopes that the light of justice emanating from the late-night newscast could rinse clean the unspeakable filth caked on his soul. But even with the unpleasant newscast droning into his ears, He Yu didn't hang up, because he could hear Xie Qingcheng and Chen Man's conversation. "Ge, why don't I go and talk to him? Giving him the silent treatment like this isn't really... There's no need. What happened with you two? Weren't you on good terms before?" "You should go and wash up, Chen Man." Xie Qingcheng didn't respond to his question. "Go to bed. You have to supervise a scene set in the police department tomorrow." Young Master Chen was truly too well behaved. He Yu heard how he didn't even try to protest, merely sitting silently for a while before rising to his feet with a rustling noise and closing the bathroom door behind him. He Yu lay on his bed and listened quietly, his hair tickling his brow. Although he didn't usually leave his bangs down, his dark hair was very soft. If he didn't comb it carefully, some fine strands at his temples always fell over his forehead. The newscast continued to play, and Xie Qingcheng likewise continued in silence. Still, He Yu did not hang up. He stared up at the ceiling as the news headlines blaring out of his earbuds shifted from the municipal party secretary's visit with aging empty nesters to a story about some neighborhood's pet dog learning how to hold a basket in its mouth and going out to help its owner buy groceries. He listened without uttering a word. He Yu couldn't describe what he was feeling right now. There had always been a heavy mass blocking up his heart. Now that he knew the truth about Chen Man's social status, now that he knew what Xie Qingcheng had been doing in recent days and who he had been with, it was as though that heavy mass had grown twisted, plant-like roots that stabbed into the deepest reaches of his heart and veins. He didn't know why he cared so much. Just who was Xie Qingcheng anyway? Nothing more than a fuck toy. He was only seeking a temporary novelty. He'd grow tired of it eventually, once he'd had his fill. But even so, he couldn't bring himself to hang up the phone. Gujing Genuine Distilled Spirits, the finest authentic wine. The other end of the line started playing commercials. He Yu heard Xie Qingcheng get off the bed, walk closer, and then pick up the phone he had set next to the television. A brief silence. Perhaps Xie Qingcheng hadn't expected He Yu to wait so patiently and listen to the news for so long. When he saw that the line was still open, he truly did go quiet for a long while. No other noise came from the phone. Then, He Yu heard Xie Qingcheng speak. "What exactly are you trying to do?" He Yu didn't know how to answer. Gazing up at the ceiling with overcast eyes, he picked up his cell phone and brought it to his lips. Xie Ching-chung, he said. There's no way that an ugly old man like you, divorced, poor, boring, and in bad health, could possibly catch the eye of a grandson of a founding party member like him. If you want to be with him, you're a fool. He didn't know which twisted corner of his heart had fomented such jealous words, nor did he know whether Xie Ching-chung had heard what he said, whether he'd unmuted his call. But in the end, Xie Ching-chung just hung up. When He Yu dialed the number again, his phone had been turned off. Despite a long time spent tossing and turning, He Yu couldn't fall asleep. Resting his head on his hands, he stared at the ceiling with his almond eyes as vehicles sped past the window at irregular intervals, their lights mechanically cutting into the shadows as they swam across the ceiling like whales. Meanwhile, he was like a whale fall, a giant carcass sinking deep into the sea. We have jellyfish and now we have whales. He felt as though his heart had already begun to rot. It wasn't like that time in Hangzhou, when he could still feel pain. His entire body was cold. He'd gone numb. The dark night gradually fell silent. A pair of girls passed through the corridor on the 7th floor, walking right past He Yu's door. Lying awake in his room, He Yu could hear them talking. The event today was a lot of fun. Yeah, hey, what's that? There was a glass cabinet over 2 meters tall at the end of the hotel corridor. But it didn't quite look like a piece of furniture, more like a giant pill capsule. The light in the corridor was dim, and there were a bunch of indistinct shadows inside the cabinet. To those girls who'd just come back late at night, it looked like a human figure. There's a body. There's a body in the glass cabinet. Their cries jolted He Yu out of his gloom. Climbing out of bed, he opened the door and went outside. The 2 girls were pale with fright. Seeing a tall young man show up, they stumbled over to He Yu's side, pointing behind them as they ran. There's a body over there, in the cabinet. Perhaps their screams had been too loud. Not long after, the door to He Yu's neighboring room also flew open. Xie Ching-chung walked out. He Yu met the eyes of the man he had been spam calling a few hours earlier for just a moment. Then Xie Ching-chung looked away. Chen Man also ran out of the room. What's going on? What happened? Inside that cabinet, one of the girls stuttered out. Standing right there. There's a person, completely motionless. They must be dead. She was so terrified that her face had gone chalky white. Like her friend, she quickly became incoherent beyond words. I'll go take a look, said Xie Ching-chung. He walked over. He Yu had wanted to follow him, but Chen Man beat him to the punch. Once Chen Man had already gone, He Yu found himself reluctant to follow, and he ended up standing there with his arms crossed, a dark expression on his face. Once Xie Ching-chung got closer, realization dawned. He turned back to the girls. It's fine. It's just a prop. Ah, it's a prop for the trial. We'll be using it in a few days for filming. Xie Ching-chung cast the beam of his cell phone's flashlight over the contents of the cabinet. Just as he said, under the bright light of the cell phone, the girls could clearly see that the thing standing inside the cabinet was just a lifelike rubber dummy. Even as the girls let out a sigh of relief, they found themselves somewhat torn between laughter and annoyance. Who would leave a prop like that in a place like this? Right? What a dick. The 8th floor is reserved for makeup, costuming, and props, said Chen Man, so it might be a sample that they brought along and just left here for the time being. Patting themselves on their chests in lingering fear, the girls finally left. Xie Ching-chung examined the dummy in the glass cabinet. It made him a bit uncomfortable. Perhaps it was the uncanny valley effect. The dummy was a bit too lifelike, to the point of inspiring terror. He looked away and walked back to his room. When he turned around to close the door behind him, He saw that He Yu had already returned to his own room next door. It seemed like he didn't want to say even a single extra word to him in Chenmon's presence. He Yu locked his door with a click. Xie Qingcheng had only just begun to relax when, less than a minute later, his cell phone suddenly buzzed. It was a text message from He Yu. Xie Qingcheng, I'm warning you one last time. He is gay. Not to mention, you two are such a bad match. You're divorced, and he's barely in his 20s. You have no money or status, while his grandfather is political commissar Wang. It's a terrible match, no matter how you look at it. Why in the world would he like you? Be careful you don't end up swindled to hell and back. It's time to wake up. That young man seriously had issues. Xie Qingcheng deleted his message, entered his room, and shut the door. Oh god, okay. Okay. Alright. Here we go. Sorry, neither of them had noticed that a figure stood in the shadows of the stairway behind the glass cabinet. Hidden in the darkness was a frightful-looking man wearing a black raincoat and boots, holding a knife half concealed beneath the raincoat. You guys got off easy this time, he muttered to himself ominously. I was planning on making my move tonight. If the higher-ups hadn't switched my target to a much bigger fish all of a sudden. Chuckling softly, he slowly sheathed his knife. Whatever. Looks like I won't be fishing tonight. I immediately am like, who is his target? Who was his target switched to? I don't like it. I knew there was going to be something about the cabinet. Like, I'm like, okay, there's a fake out here, but there's going to be, like, a real threat around somewhere. I knew it. The first day of shooting for the trial had a rather rocky start. There were mishaps in a number of different areas, and issues arose with the actors' performances. The film's creative team consisted entirely of established artists who took their craft very seriously and refused to lower their standards. And after several rounds of polishing, the sky had already gone dark as they ran over the shoot's scheduled end time. Looks like it's going to be a late night tonight, a production assistant sighed from atop a box of lighting equipment. The winter night was chilly, so the director ordered a case of hot beverages to be sent over to the production team. All the crew members taking their breaks swarmed around it to grab a drink. Even if they didn't drink it, it could at least warm their hands up a bit. I've got my jellyfish bottle to commemorate the occasion. He Yu was shadowing the director. He'd been staring at the monitor so intently his eyes hurt. If nothing else, it helped divert some of his attention. It was only after they finished shooting one of the major highlights of the film that He Yu finally made his way over to the case of drinks, by which point nearly all that remained were fruit teas. He didn't like fruit tea, so he leaned down and rummaged around for a good while until he finally dug out a cup of hot chocolate. At that very moment, however, a hand calmly reached over and snatched that cup of hot chocolate from right under his nose. He Yu looked up. The sky was dim and dreary, forecasting snow, and there were no lights in this area, so it took a while for his eyes to adjust before he recognized who it was. He found himself face to face with Xie Qingcheng. Both of them fell into an awkward silence. Xie Qingcheng was working with Group B next door today. The reason Groups A and B were both working at the same set was because the highly ambitious creatives behind the film had unexpectedly scheduled a large-scale scene on the very first day of the shoot. As a result, a chaotic jumble of actors, consultants, body doubles, and extras were all present for the opening day of filming. Xie Qingcheng hadn't recognized He Yu until now. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have come over at all. After a long beat of silence, he lowered his head, picked up the hot chocolate alongside a cup of fruit tea, and turned to leave. It was a good thing he left. Having spotted Xie Qingcheng on his own, He Yu could feel a rather deranged impulse rearing its head. His mental illness made him want to take advantage of the fact that Xie Qingcheng was alone to drag the man into his lair and tear him to pieces. He wanted to chain this offering to a bed of stone and force the human to listen to his every word, lest he snap his arms and legs off. This was a dragon's evil instinct. Xie Qingcheng had once occupied the dragon's bed, and so, even if he became a skeleton, it was imperative that he rot in He Yu's territory. Not even his bones could be stained by another's touch. He Yu closed his eyes to calm himself, suppressing the fantasy that had sprung up at a completely inopportune time. Fruit tea in hand, he returned to the soundstage with a somber expression on his face. The soundstage was warmer than outside, but his heart was even colder than before. That was because he'd learned that the technical consultation crew had required Xie Qingcheng and Chen Man to move from Group B to watch Group A's shoot. And as for the hot chocolate that he had yielded to Xie Qingcheng just now, Xie Qingcheng had already passed it to Chen Man, who was waiting for the camera to move to the correct position for the second take. Xie Qingcheng hadn't done this on purpose, nor had He Yu told him this was the drink he had just dug up for himself. Yet He Yu still felt a sense of displeasure course through his whole body. Sitting on a plastic chair with a chilly look on his face, he asked the assistant for an old announcement flyer. He thought it over for a moment, bowed his head and wrote a few words, then folded the notice into a paper airplane. The paper airplane soared straight through the air towards Xie Qingcheng's back, landing on his shoulder. Xie Qingcheng turned around to see He Yu sitting in a plastic chair less than 20 meters away, with his cheek propped up against his hand and his long legs crossed. Long legs mentioned. His posture lazy, and his gaze indifferent. The moment their eyes met, that boy whose beauty bordered on effeminacy merely raised an eyebrow provocatively and then rolled his eyes, turning away with a lax expression on his face. Xie Qingcheng picked up the paper airplane, on which a handful of words could be read. He unfolded the old flyer to see the ugly, nearly illegible scrawl that He Yu had written in his lousy mood. Does it taste good? Are the two of you enjoying your drinks together? When Xie Qingcheng finished reading, the look in his eyes was even colder than usual. Right before He Yu's eyes, he folded the notice in half, tore it down the middle, and tossed it straight into the garbage bin. Not He Yu's paper airplane shooting towards the sky. He Yu didn't make a sound. He'd anticipated that Xie Qingcheng would react like this, but he'd still insisted on doing it anyway, just so he could see Xie Qingcheng's face, which was chillier than the weather outside. When Xie Qingcheng turned back around to speak with Chen Man, it was like his expression had frozen over in a blizzard. As He Yu stared at Xie Qingcheng, his eyes weren't pure at all. Rather, they burned hotter and more blatant than the lover's desire that was currently being portrayed on camera by an award-winning actor. At once coldly gloomy and searingly hot, it was as though something was slowly simmering over a tiny flame in his heart, gradually heating up to a boil. He turned his face to the side, the jut of his throat bobbing silently as he swallowed. Xie Qingcheng walked into a break tent to sit down, and He Yu immediately came up with an excuse for the director and left to follow Xie Qingcheng into the tent. When Xie Qingcheng looked up and caught sight of him entering, the already coldly detached expression in his eyes cooled several more degrees, sheening with frost. Hu Yu felt a surge of annoyance as soon as he entered the tent. He'd wanted to find a chance to speak with Xie Qingcheng alone. He hadn't expected that a small crowd of resting crew members would all be sitting around the makeshift plastic table inside the tent. Are there any more seats? There's a stool over here. Seeing a handsome young man come in, and the director's assistant to boot, one of the crew members stood up at once. She grabbed a plastic stool from the corner, wiped it off, and handed it to Hu Yu. Thank you. The crew member blushed, but she might as well have blushed for a blind man, because Hu Yu merely took the stool and sat down across from Xie Qingcheng. Everyone was seated around a long table, which was piled high with miscellaneous items. There were even several crew members shoveling takeout into their mouths. Hu Yu liked cleanliness, so he wouldn't usually want to stay in such a messy place for very long. But sitting right across from Xie Qingcheng, his eyes didn't take in a single speck of dust. All he could see was Xie Qingcheng's face as he looked down and fiddled with his phone. Xie Qingcheng seemed to have decided to pointedly avoid looking at him, as if he would much rather stare down at his phone screen than spare Hu Yu half a glance. Hu Yu looked him over. In this moment, all those thoughts. I need to quit this person. I won't get addicted to Xie Qingcheng again. Xie Qingcheng is an ugly, poor, divorced, chain-smoking old man. Disappeared from his mind. So many people's breaths mixed together in the air. But it seemed like he could only smell the cool scent of disinfectant on Xie Qingcheng's body. That was a scent he lusted for deeply. As Hu Yu stared at him, his gaze became less and less innocent. If that gaze could materialize into touch, Hu Yu might have already unbuttoned Xie Qingcheng's suit. It was unfortunate that a human's gaze was always honest. It was unsophisticated and candid, oblivious to self-concealment, and could not become an accomplice to the inner self. Furthermore, it was completely incapable of committing offenses such as stripping off someone's clothes. In the past, Hu Yu had never thought that he would want something like this. Before, he'd always felt rather indifferent toward people, and he looked down on the other high-born sons in his circle who lost themselves to alcohol and the pleasures of the body. He had never realized that carnal desire could make a person so helpless to stop. Since Xie Qingcheng wouldn't look at him, he bowed his head and sent him a message. Dr. Xie, are you pretending you can't see me? Xie Qingcheng's phone vibrated. He'd clearly seen the message. Hu Yu waited. But Xie Qingcheng didn't reply. The weeds in his heart started sprouting in a riot of overgrown greenery. The more Xie Qingcheng ignored him, the stronger the oppressive feeling in his heart became, and the more liable he was to do something unhinged. Hu Yu was truly audacious. In this crowded place, he even dared to send Xie Qingcheng some of those good morning couple photos that he'd photoshopped. How did I forget about those? This time, Hu Yu saw Xie Qingcheng's knuckles turn white as his hand tightened around his phone. The lines on his face tensed up in tandem, his entire body emanating the aura of an ice-cold, dangerously sharp blade. Henry, if I had a nickel every time a Danmei gong with mental health problems was aroused by their partner's scent of medical-grade alcohol. I'm very curious what other Danmei has this same thing. Yeah, finishing Arha with Brittany, that was a bit of a distraction. Understandably so. This reaction soothed the shadowy perversion in Hu Yu's heart a little. Extending a long leg. Oh my god, long leg mentioned. Extending a long leg, he slowly nudged Xie Qingcheng's foot under the table Again and again. I think I know what you're talking about, Henry. But what's weird is I'm not remembering the exact scenario, and I'm like, wait, this could be. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I'm just processing that he's trying to play footsie with him. Xie Jingcheng finally looked up. His eyes were extremely cutting, but even though his expression was unsightly, he was still unexpectedly calm. He didn't want to lose his temper with He Yu. After all, what use was there in getting angry with an animal? He gazed indifferently back at He Yu as if he were staring at a beast in rut. Yeah, no, I remember now. We even talked about this. I was like, it's kind of the opposite of Case File in a way. But now that He Yu has turned around and is attracted to the scent of the medical antiseptic scent, now they're no longer so opposite. I'm gonna say that line again. He gazed indifferently back at He Yu as if he were staring at a beast in rut. Under that stare, He Yu inexplicably remembered that after he'd forced Xie Qingcheng into an unbearably wretched state, he had once said to him, "Don't you know the biggest difference between humans and animals? Humans can control themselves." Xie Qingcheng hadn't said anything, yet He Yu felt he could read these words in his eyes once more. For some reason, he suddenly felt a wave of intense resentment. He'd had self-control before, but Xie Qingcheng was the one who had torn it to shreds. Shouldn't he shoulder the blame? When Xie Qingcheng's face had gone slack on his pillow, how was he any different from a female beast that had been deeply marked and lost all sense of reason? How could he have the face to look at him so indifferently? Xie Qingcheng tried to move his foot away, only for He Yu's leg to emphatically block his way. Both of them paused for a moment. Everyone sitting at the table was very relaxed. Whether they were chatting, eating, or browsing their phones, each person minded their own business. No one noticed the turbulent undercurrent on their end, or the surreptitious entanglement beneath the table. He Yu stared deeply into Xie Qingcheng's eyes, as if he wanted his gaze to burrow into the man's pupils. Even he was confused as to why this man could drive him to this. A fierce vindictiveness suddenly rose within him. He looked down and typed, "Since when were Dr. Xia's legs so strong? They weren't like this when we were together before. Were you just pretending you had no strength left because you actually liked how I treated you? Oh yeah, Xiege, does young Master Chen know that we've slept together before? Does he know what you looked like when we were doing it?" The more he typed, the more outrageous his words became. If those high-level Huzhou University administrators who had given He Yu all those awards knew that the boy they'd selected as one of the top 10 outstanding male students, chairman of the student government, model first-year student, scholarship recipient of distinguished learning and virtues, who had received endless compliments and medals, was able to compose such vulgar messages, their esteemed elderliness's eyeglasses would probably shatter into a million pieces in their shock. The moment I saw that Chen Man, I could tell he doesn't suit you at all. If you're with him because of his status, then you might as well forget about it. Be good and come with me. Just tell me if there's anything that you want. Anything he can give you, I can give you too. A dull smack. Xie Qingcheng slammed his phone heavily onto the table, so hard that everyone around them froze and turned to stare at him. Xie Qingcheng hadn't planned on making a fuss in public, but he was simply so furious he hadn't been able to hold himself back. However, he didn't want to put on a show for their onlookers right now either. So in the end, he just stared wordlessly at He Yu for a few seconds with the utmost self-restraint and chilliness, then got up to leave. Just then, the curtain of the tent rose and fell again as another person walked in. Xie Qingcheng's eyes flickered briefly. He Yu was sitting with his back to the entrance, but seeing Xie Qingcheng's expression, he guessed that Chen Man had likewise walked in to take a break. He had absolutely no desire to see young Master Chen right now, to the point that he wished he could get his hands on a dimensionality reduction eraser and completely wipe Chen Man's existence from this world. Ooh, there's a footnote, and it mentions a book which I have been planning to read. Online slang derived from the dimensionality reduction weapon from Liu Cixin's novel, The Three Body Problem, typically used to describe a cheap trick to defeat an enemy. So he didn't look back, not until the other man's voice rang out. So you're here too, Dr. Xie. It was the low, husky voice of an adult man, one who also gave off the scent of disinfectant. He Yu finally turned around to see a meticulously dressed man standing at the entrance. He looked around 35 or 36 years old. He had his hands in his pockets, his attitude steady and his expression gentle. The man's gaze shifted to land on He Yu's face. He raised his brows slightly. So many familiar faces in this production. It really is a big one. Cousin, you're here as well. Ah, it's the cousin. We've met the cousin. Xie Qingcheng had merely been surprised to see this man at first. But now, upon hearing him call He Yu cousin, even the highly composed doctor couldn't conceal a look of shock. Back when Xie Qingcheng had come down with a fever after being tormented by He Yu for an entire night, this man was the one who had treated him in overnight urgent care. He was the director of Huzhou First Hospital's emergency department, and he also happened to be He Yu's older cousin. They were distant cousins, and because they weren't very closely related by blood, their families didn't see each other often. He Jiwei's relationship with his family's elders was quite stiff, so they only saw each other once in a while at large family gatherings. They were utterly indifferent to each other, their relationship even more superficial than that of random neighbors. He Yu hadn't even known that this cousin was a doctor at Huzhou First Hospital. Since He Yu didn't know, of course Xie Qingcheng wouldn't know either. Huzhou First Hospital was very big, so its staff members weren't necessarily all familiar with one another. The director wasn't particularly close to Xie Qingcheng, as they'd only consulted together and seen each other at medical conferences a handful of times. However, despite their scant interactions, Xie Qingcheng had always found him relatively agreeable. He never could have imagined that this emergency department director was actually He Yu's distant cousin. Sorry, I turned the page and I saw the chapter title. That's the end of the chapter. We're now on page 281 for chapter 78, which is called I Took on a Sex Scene. Perfect. Nothing at all could go wrong. The emergency department director was on set to give guidance on parts of the movie set in a hospital emergency room. However, there weren't many scenes that required his direct oversight, so he'd be returning to the hospital in a few days' time. Now that his elder cousin had appeared, He Yu couldn't blow him off, no matter how distant their relationship was. At the same time, an actor needed to ask Xie Qingcheng about something related to his field. An assistant ran over to request his presence, so Xie Qingcheng left. He Yu left the tent with his cousin to walk around the area. The director also smoked and smelled faintly of disinfectant, But for some reason, he didn't smell like Xie Qingcheng. He found his scent unpleasantly sharp. You know Xie Qingcheng too, the director said. A statement rather than a question. Someone in the family told you? The director took a drag of his cigarette. No, I read it in the papers. The reports about what happened at Huzhou University were very detailed. When those old videos were dug up, most people thought he had been discredited for good. Yet, you're still so close to him? He Yu didn't respond to the director's question, but he realized something. If his cousin worked at Huzhou First Hospital, he might know some concrete details about what had happened back then. Were you there? He Yu asked. When the 2 videos were filmed? You sure asked the right person. I was. Then, at the time, it was exactly the same as what you saw in the videos. He wasn't misrepresented. What did you think? That the videos were edited? The director arched a brow, shooting He Yu a mocking glance. The 2 of them walked shoulder to shoulder. After a while, the director added, That said, I for one feel that Xie Qingcheng is much too elusive. It's like he's always been hiding some secret, something he doesn't want people to know about. Is that what you think? Mm-hmm. People are often psychologically tense when they have something weighing on their mind. He's exceptionally calm and self-disciplined for all 365 days of the year. Not a second goes by when he isn't on full alert. That's a textbook example of someone with a heavy mental load. The director flicked away some cigarette ash. But if you really want to know, you should just ask him. Surely the difficulties you faced together at the Huzhou Broadcasting Tower brought you closer. It would have been fine if he hadn't mentioned that issue, but the moment he did, He Yu's eyes darkened once more. What, he won't even tell you? Asked the director. No, He Yu replied. We're not that close. Thanks to his conversation with the director, by the time they wrapped for the day, He Yu's state of mind was truly dismal. He didn't return to the hotel in the film director's car. The tent they'd used today wasn't all that far from their rooms to begin with. So he just stayed with the emergency department director. The 2 cousins took a leisurely stroll back. He Yu never expected to spot Xie Qingcheng and Chen Man sharing a midnight snack as they passed a collection of night market stalls along the way. Evidently, the director noticed as well. Sitting at that greasy little night market stall, Xie Qingcheng was truly too eye-catching. With his cold, aloof aura and ramrod straight posture, it was very difficult for him to disappear into a crowd. It seemed like he wanted to smoke a cigarette, but Chen Man was trying to persuade him against it, even going so far as to grab his lighter from him. Ignoring him, Xie Qingcheng got up and went over to the next table to ask a man with a sleeve tattoo for a light, who lit the end with a click. Chen Man could only return his lighter. I've seen that guy before, said the director. He's a cop. He's a cop who doesn't have a single badge on his shoulders, He Yu corrected him. The director stared at them for a bit. I thought he looked familiar last time I saw him. He's the grandson of Yanzhou's political commissar Wang, isn't he? Though Chen Man didn't usually mention his background, he was still the grandson of a founding party member and similar to him in status, a thought that made He Yu uncomfortable every time it had crossed his mind over the last few days. The director wasn't done yet, though. He continued blandly. Are they a couple? He Yu turned toward him with a blank expression. A couple of what? The director raised his eyebrow. What other kinds of couples are there? Why do you ask? Last time I was on call in the ER, Xie Qingcheng came in with a fever. This cop was the one who accompanied him. Nurse Zhou said there was another time when this young Master Chen watched over him while he received an IV drip. Despite their veneer of propriety, these doctors were unexpectedly gossipy. They didn't admit it, but I even saw hickeys on Xie Ching-chung last time. The way that little cop kept at it until his lover had a high fever and had to go to the hospital. I suspect that even though he looks well-behaved, he's probably a violent maniac. The violent maniac listened expressionlessly without speaking a single word, but his heart simmered with displeasure. He was the one who'd left those kiss marks. They were evidence of how fervently they'd fucked. What the hell did they have to do with Chen Man? After bidding his cousin goodbye and returning to the hotel, He Yu's bloodthirsty and irascible desire only intensified. As the elevator doors opened, he walked toward his room, hoping to avoid encountering any living souls so that his desire for violent conflict wouldn't have the opportunity to rear its head. However, as he approached his room, he just so happened to see that the door to Xie Ching-chung's room was open. There was a push cart standing just outside the door, likely because Xie Ching-chung had called housekeeping and asked them to come and clean the bathtub. He Yu was very familiar with Xie Ching-chung's fondness for baths. Back when Xie Ching-chung had stayed at his house, on extremely busy work days, he would usually take a hot bath in the evening to unwind after spending the entire day on edge. As expected, when he tilted his head slightly to the side, he could see a housekeeping attendant scrubbing away in the bathroom. He Yu paused. He knew that Xie Ching-chung and Chen Man had yet to become involved physically. Not yet. He's, convinced it's going to happen. Xie Ching-chung simply didn't believe that Chen Man was gay, so never mind cleaning the bathtub. Even a change of bed sheets wouldn't necessarily mean that they'd engage in any filthy activities together. Well, Xie Ching-chung might not be filthy, but Chen Man was way too much of a sleaze. Chen Man had tried to steal a kiss from Xie Ching-chung, He Yu thought with cold detachment. He Yu felt that if you were truly a man, you ought to kiss him openly and without any tricks. If worst came to worst, you'd get slapped in the face and cursed out. But in the end, Chen Man didn't dare. Even amongst gays, He Yu thought darkly to himself, this young Master Chen was a useless piece of trash. But he still felt very uncomfortable. When he thought about how Xie Ching-chung would be bathing in this very room with Chen Man right outside, he felt uncomfortable from head to toe. To prevent his mood from deteriorating even further, He Yu looked away, fully intending to head back to his own room. But as he turned his head, he caught sight of the two beds inside their room. Both of the beds were very neatly made, but even so, it was very easy to tell which one belonged to Chen Man. That was because Chen Man had tossed a PSP and a police uniform onto his bed. Chen Man's bed was the one pressed to the wall. Ashen-faced, the very first thing He Yu did upon returning to his own room and slamming the door shut was to roll up his sleeves and move his bed, which he had spent considerable effort in shoving against the wall the night before, back into its original place. He absolutely refused to be so close to young Master Chen. Unbearably moody, He Yu heard the housekeeping attendant next door prepared to leave. Who knew what exactly he was thinking? Perhaps he'd suffered a brain spasm, but he went and called the attendant over. "Is there something I can do for you, sir?" With an outwardly calm expression, He Yu said, "Could I trouble you to help me clean my bathtub as well?" "Thank you." Once the housekeeping attendant left, just like Xie Ching-chung, He Yu took a bath. He lay in the tub, savoring the warm pressure of the water, as if it could fill the gaping cavity inside his chest. He hadn't turned on the bathroom lights. Closing his eyes in the darkness, he lay there for a long time, the warm water rippling quietly around him. Chen Man's identity, his cousin's words, Xie Ching-chung's receding figure, cold and forbidding. It's like he's always been hiding some secret. People are tense when they have something weighing on their mind. He won't even tell you? Surely the difficulties you faced together at the Huzhou Broadcasting Tower brought you closer. Are they a couple? I even saw hickeys on Xie Qingcheng last time. He Yu's breathing grew heavier and heavier as an ache tore into his heart, and thoroughly extinguished whatever thoughts he'd once had about trying to quit the drug that was Xie Qingcheng. He resented him, had endless contempt for him, but in the end, he couldn't resist the rampant lust of youth. It was even more difficult to suppress than the violent bloodlust stemming from his illness. He could still control his impulse to hurt people, but he couldn't restrain his ruthless desire to possess Xie Qingcheng. He was unable to pry a single honest word out of Xie Qingcheng's deceptive, lying mouth. Xie Qingcheng simply refused to tell him anything. But at least in bed, when Xie Qingcheng was dazed from his ministrations, the expressions on his face were honest, just as the emotions within his grasp were completely unadulterated and true. He doubted that Xie Qingcheng had ever acted like this with Li Ruoqiu. If that was true, then the only person in the world who had ever seen Xie Qingcheng in such a state was He Yu himself. This thought finally gave him a bit of relief from the pressure of his physical and mental strain. But after clearing his mind, changing into fresh clothes, and walking out of the bathroom, He Yu glanced at his reflection and found himself thinking that the lonely boy standing in the mirror with water dripping from the ends of his hair seemed pretty pathetic. He Laoshe, are you there? Just as he finished blow-drying his hair, someone knocked on the door. These days, many people had the habit of calling those they didn't know well Laoshe. He Yu opened the door to see Executive Huang's assistant standing outside. What is it? Oh, it's just a few things. The assistant pushed her glasses up. She was still very nervous around He Yu. There's the script and the schedule for the next few days. There's also the list of characters with just a handful of lines and scenes. Executive Huang said that they were originally planning on finding some experienced extras to play these parts. He was wondering if you might be interested in picking a role to try out. I think I see where we're going, judging by the chapter title. Because the executive producer, Mr. Huang Zhulong, was paying him special attention, and because his mother, Liu Jishu, had called Executive Huang and implored him again and again to give He Yu opportunities to gain different types of practical experience. In addition to He Yu's daily routine of shadowing the director, Executive Huang had also arranged a cameo role for him. He Yu took the thick stack of papers. Thank you for your hard work. That evening, He Yu lay alone on his bed and spent a long time reading the script. Executive Huang's assistant had very considerately highlighted the cameo scenes in different colors, and even made a table of contents, so looking through it wasn't tedious at all. After he'd finished reading everything, He Yu sent a message to Huang Zhulong with all of his usual politeness, thanking Executive Huang for going out of his way to look after him. Then he told him which cameo role he was interested in taking. The moment Executive Huang saw the character's name, he was struck dumb. He'd thought that role would be the first one He Yu crossed off the list. You're not joking with me, are you, Xiaohe? I'm serious. The slightly rumpled bed was covered in papers. In the end, He Yu had circled and selected one of the cameo roles that had been marked on the schedule for the day after tomorrow. Next to that character's name, there was a line of shocking scarlet words spelling out a highlighted reminder. This role is featured in a sex scene. Meanwhile, clearly written in the notes column of the schedule, a psychiatrist will serve as the technical consultant for this scene. The expert for this day, Xie Qingcheng. Beautiful. Perfect. No wonder he took the role. Well, now is the perfect time to take a break. So I'm going to go take a break for about 10 minutes. And when we come back, we will be on page 291 for chapter 79, which is called You Watched Me Put on a Performance. Another great chapter title. By the way, oh my god. I just remembered something while I was reading, like, a few paragraphs ago, and I wanted to say it for some reason, and I've completely forgotten whatever the heck it was. But I was going to say, I'm wondering if He-Yu's cousin is going to play a larger role. Like, every time some person is introduced, I'm like, are you suspicious? Are you suspicious? So I'm feeling that about him, but maybe his role was just simply to tell He-Yu that, like, Xie Qingcheng is, like, hiding a secret. Maybe that was it. But I don't know. Oh my god, it's gonna bug me. I'm gonna try to remember what the heck I was going to say during the break. It didn't really... I don't think it had to do with case file, but something reminded me of it, and oh my god, this is gonna bug the heck out of me. This is why I need my ADHD meds, so this kind of thing doesn't happen as often. Alright, well, I will be back shortly. Hello, I am back. I remembered the thing that I thought of and then forgot. So I'm gonna tell the story in a second. But first, Saikin, you said something I thought about last night. I'm wondering if Huyu's dad is telling the truth. He could just be trying to garner sympathy for the mom, like fully in cahoots with her. He kind of has, like, to me, he feels like he has a little bit of cluelessness about him. Like, I feel like he doesn't know what the mom is up to, but I'm not sure. And it's meat buns, so we can't trust anyone or anything. So that is definitely a possibility. Or she could have manipulated him into believing that that's how or why it happened. I can also see that. So the thing I remembered, I don't know what specifically, like, made me think of this, but, I was on a plane the other day, and there was actually, like, in-flight Wi-Fi, and I, like, had my phone in airplane mode, but then I, like, put the Wi-Fi on, and when you turn on airplane mode, it turns off Bluetooth, and I just kind of forgot about that, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep watching this Kichter video that I had been watching, and, like, I put my earbuds in, and I started playing the video, and the earbuds are, like, pretty good at sound blocking. So the video is playing for a second, and I realized, like, oh, the sound is not coming in my earbuds because I don't have Bluetooth on. So I go to turn Bluetooth on, and I, like, went back a few seconds in the video to, like, see what I missed. And, like, the very first word out of Stitch's mouth at that point in the video is aphrodisiac. And I was just like, oh god, did everyone just hear that coming from my phone, like, out loud? They probably did. So anyway, we're now we resume case file. Like I said, we're on chapter 79, which is called You Watched Me Put on a Performance. Xie Qingcheng and He Yu sat facing each other inside the small temporary rest tent. Chances were good that Executive Huang was secretly over the moon that He Yu had taken on this thorny role, one that had caused the production team no small measure of grief. This kind of role had very little screen time, and was nothing more than a minor walk-on part. But its difficulty was astronomical. Plus, it included a significant sex scene, which made it automatically objectionable to a lot of people. When the casting director tried to enlist students from the film school, most of them refused. While they could recruit someone from among the extras, the results would likely be extremely cringeworthy. Not to mention, the screenwriter had described the character as being a handsome crime boss with a gently refined appearance and noble bearing. Where could they possibly find a minor supporting actor fitting these requirements in such a short amount of time? It was an extremely irksome problem. When He Yu said that he'd do it, it was akin to the sky bestowing sweet rain after a long drought. How could Executive Huang not burn incense and thank Executive Liu profusely? A lot of detailed work went into filming a sex scene. Prior to the beginning of the shoot, everything had to be discussed in very clear terms. To strip or not to strip, how to go about stripping, where should the discarded articles of clothing go, what kinds of emotions should the actors portray? Should they be passionate, teasing, urgent, restrained, highly experienced and completely in control, inexperienced and completely ignorant of what to do? All of these things had to be hashed out in concrete terms before the cameras began to roll. Before the shoot began, the director especially sought out He Yu to communicate all of this to him. After their chat, the director's eyes practically welled up with tears. Where did Executive Huang find such a lifesaver? He Yu had virtually no conditions and accepted all the requirements that the director cautiously brought up with perfect cooperation. He said that he was studying what went on behind the cameras and understood the difficulties that directors faced very well, especially the pride of craftsmanship that arose when the director sought to execute their work with perfection. The only condition he raised was that he wanted a long one-on-one chat with the scene's psychiatric specialist, Xie Qingcheng. As you know, I don't have any experience. He Yu spoke with extreme humility, as if he'd morphed the words pure and kind of heart into clothing and draped them over himself. I'm very anxious about causing trouble for everyone, so I want to ask Professor Xie to give me some pointers about the scene beforehand. He seemed so pure that he was too embarrassed to even say the words sex scene. Everyone felt that they were seriously burdening young Master He with this. Look at what a virtuous child he was. He was basically sacrificing the sanctity of his body for art. Since the child had such a minor request, how could the director refuse? He immediately asked Xie Qingcheng to come over and give him private psychological guidance. Henry, you are so correct. With all my love, Xie Qingcheng should not be an intimacy coordinator. That is why psychiatrist and intimacy coordinator are two different jobs. This was an outdoor scene that involved a crime boss having an affair with his nemesis's wife. It was an affair that was doomed to fail, as that woman did like the young, handsome man, but she was already the mother of 3 children and wife to a seriously ill husband. She couldn't abandon her family. She gradually calmed down from the honeymoon phase of the affair, and so, despite her heartache, she intended to break up with her lover. But the man refused. He parked the car at the deserted outskirts of town and fucked her. Through it all, the crime boss and his illicit paramour both loved each other deeply, but thanks to all the conflicting and complicated dynamics at play, that love had become thoroughly twisted. The crime boss had been a psychiatrist before returning to his home country to take over his father's turf, so he was very skilled at enticing women with words. Thus, she went from rejection to reciprocation, then ultimately ended up completely limp in her lover's arms. However, She was unable to endure the double torment of the pain and joy growing vigorously in her heart, and she chose to take her own life shortly after returning home. The winter wind was very strong, so the production crew had set up several temporary tents near the abandoned road. Yu and Xie Qingcheng were inside one of those very tents, with a thick, heavy curtain hanging over the door. Since everyone knew they were talking business, no one came in. Xie Qingcheng smoked as the rain poured outside. Winter nights in the mountains were incredibly cold, and the evening's chill rendered his face so bloodless that the flickering glow of his cigarette was the brightest spot of color on his body. How does Professor Xie think such a mentally deranged sex scene ought to be performed? Xie Qingcheng's face was completely devoid of expression. No idea. Yu smiled as he suddenly took the cigarette from Xie Qingcheng's hands, holding it between his slender fingers. Then he dipped his head, moving in to kiss Xie Qingcheng on the lips. Xie Qingcheng's hand shot up to grab him by the wrist. Have some self-respect. What do you mean? You're the one who refuses to teach me, so I'll just have to teach myself using your body. Xie Qingcheng flung his hand away. This role was made for you. Xie Qingcheng shot Yu a cold glance from across the faintly flickering kerosene lamp. You don't need me to teach you. When it comes to this type of beastly behavior, a psychiatrist like me would be no better than any armchair psychologist. Unlike you, Yu, you've had first-hand experience. Xie Qingcheng's words were cutting. Yu gazed quietly at him for a while before bringing the cigarette he'd snatched from Xie Qingcheng to his mouth. Slowly, maintaining unflinching eye contact, he bit the moistened filter. He even went so far as to press the tip of his tongue against the place where Xie Qingcheng's mouth had been and lick across the surface. He took a deep drag. As he exhaled the smoke, he pulled the cigarette away and brought it back to Xie Qingcheng's lips. Lowering his gaze, he said, "Since you've put it that way, I'll just have to accept it without reservation. By the way, this cigarette smells awful. Are you going to keep smoking it?" Of course, Xie Qingcheng wouldn't smoke a cigarette that had been in Yu's mouth. Under Yu's keen gaze, he took the cigarette and stubbed it out on the table with a hiss, right next to Yu's hand. Yu made no reply, nor did he look away from Xie Qingcheng. After a moment of silence, his gaze stroked over Xie Qingcheng's pale, tobacco-laced lips as he whispered, "Xie Qingcheng, are you really so determined to avoid me? Too bad, because you can't." To be honest, I didn't plan on getting any advice from you on a madman's mindset during a sex scene. But I have to be alone with you for a while before the shoot, and then during the scene, I'll need to have you in my sight the whole time. That's the only way I'll be able to perform to the best of my ability. There's nothing that can help me get into character better than your face. Whenever I look at you, Dr. Xie, I think of what we did all those nights. How you trembled and shook. How enthusiastically you moved your hips. How alluring you looked when you cursed at me in your rage. Xie Qingcheng looked up, gazing at him without the slightest bit of warmth in his eyes. Under normal circumstances, someone as calm as Xie Qingcheng would not become enraged so easily. Yu had just been putting on a show of, "I am a pure and innocent virgin who is eager to learn," for the director, yet now he was prattling on arrogantly like some kind of animal. However, Xie Qingcheng's only reaction was to lift his eyes and say, "Why don't you take some fever-reducing medicine? If you show up to the set like this, I can't help but worry for the actress who's partnering with you for the scene." Although his mouth said worry, his eyes were filled only with cold ridicule. Yu fell silent in an instant. A few beats later, he looked over at Xie Qingcheng with dark, icy eyes. "So now you care about me. Back then, when I sent you all those messages, I thought that even if I ended up dying from my illness, perhaps you wouldn't give me a single word in response. Is there something wrong with your ears? Xie Qingcheng replied, his voice glacial. I'm worrying about your co-star, not you. He Yu truly wanted to slap Xie Qingcheng across the face, then let him know that he was on the verge of being frustrated and tormented to death. Fucking hell, yet there Xie Qingcheng was, still making sneering quips. But what use was there in slapping him? Back at the club, he'd kicked Xie Qingcheng so hard in the chest that he couldn't even get up for a long time. And still, Xie Qingcheng had just looked at him with that calm, unyielding gaze. What could a slap solve? What could it salvage? And so He Yu only grinned with a bit of sinister roguishness and pressed closer. Then why don't you help me reduce my fever? Xie Qingcheng glanced at his watch. There's 15 minutes until filming starts. Given your prowess... Sorry, I just was like, wait a minute, what did he say? Given your prowess, there's probably time for 3 rounds, so it's not completely impossible. He Yu's expression darkened, his features shifting as he clenched his jaw. Xie Qingcheng really was trying to infuriate him to death with that calm demeanor of his. You're talking all sorts of nonsense today, he spat. It's been so long since I've been alone with you that you've even forgotten about how last time you couldn't handle it and straight up passed out. Dr. Xie is so forgetful in his middle age. Looks like I'd better work on reinforcing your memories. Xie Qingcheng adjusted his watch and replied coolly, I'm afraid you won't have many opportunities to do so in the coming days. Have fun with work. With that, he rose to leave. He Yu wanted to stop him, but he thought that might make him seem a little too pathetic. His fingertips twitched slightly as he resisted the impulse. He stood in the depths of the tent, staring hard at the man's silhouette. Xie Qingcheng, did you know? I really want to film a sex scene with you. I'll be thinking of your face during the scene. So make sure you get a good look from the director's monitor. No matter who I'm acting with, the partner I'm thinking about will always be you. Xie Qingcheng stood before the insulated curtain that he'd lifted partway to finish listening to He Yu's spiel. Then he made his clinical diagnosis. If it gets over 40 degrees, you should go see your cousin for urgent care. Don't give yourself brain damage. Then he left without a backward glance, leaving He Yu alone with an unfathomable expression on his face in the tent that still held a faint trace of his tobacco scent. The greatest skill this beast named He Yu possessed was the fact that he could talk dirty one moment, without batting an eye, then change his tune in the next moment and put on a perfect show of gentility and refinement to interact with outsiders. Xie Qingcheng did have to watch He Yu's performance through the monitor in the creative director's tent. Before filming began, He Yu went to check in with the screenwriters. It was well lit here, putting his face on full display. The stylist had done his makeup in a soft and refined style, and his lips curved in a gently meaningful smile when he shot a glance in Xie Qingcheng's direction. He really did seem shy and embarrassed to be shooting his first ever sex scene. Relax, said Executive Huang. Hu Yi laughed. Young Master He, we'll be clearing the area in a short while, and you won't be undressing too much, so don't worry. He Yu thanked them all in turn, but when he got to Xie Qingcheng, he suddenly came to a stop. He stared fixedly at him. Then, as everyone looked on, he said to Xie Qingcheng with perfect courtesy, Dr. Xie, thank you very much for your guidance earlier. I hope that my performance will not let you down. Only Xie Qingcheng and He Yu knew how many sordid secrets, like clandestine messages transmitted in Morse code, were hidden within those courteous words. Xie Qingcheng couldn't say much in front of all these people. Cigarette in hand, he stood there with his back ramrod straight, dark eyes gazing calmly at He Yu. I'll be waiting with bated breath. Yu glanced down, a smile at the corners of his lips, as he turned to the side. Then, with an assistant holding an umbrella behind him, he brushed past Xie Qingcheng and walked onto the finished set. It was easy for a sex scene to feel awkward, so the director had cleared out the area and told everyone who wasn't directly involved to leave. Next to the car, in the pouring rain, the director clutched the screenplay in his hand and went over the scene one last time with Yu and his scene partner. Then, after giving the two actors some words of encouragement, he turned off his microphone and had them climb into the car where they were going to perform, leaving them to get comfortable with each other for a while. The production team had gone through considerable effort to hire this actress. Although she was a C-lister, her combination of looks and experience made her the best candidate the production staff could find. The woman she was playing planned on breaking up with her lover during their final secret rendezvous. That day, her character had been sitting in the hotel in a strappy red nightgown, her hair still mussed, when she suddenly said that she wanted to take a drive and get a breath of fresh air. She got into the man's car, and the two of them drove in wordless silence for a long time before she finally told him her thoughts. The man slammed on the brakes, and then the car sex scene would ensue. Although the actress had played many types of characters before and had a wealth of experience, this was her first time acting in a sex scene. She was quite nervous and couldn't look Yu in the eye as she sat in the passenger seat and fiddled with her hair. However, as she twirled the strands in her fingers, she remembered that Yu was so much younger than her, still a student even, and that, as his senior, she should at least try to look after him. So she cleared her throat, made an effort to calm herself down, and began to make small talk. "Hey kid, are you nervous?" Yu smiled. "I'm all right, about the same as you." "It's okay. Just pretend the camera isn't there. Don't worry too much." "Thank you." Seeing that the younger man wasn't all that tense, the actress also relaxed slightly. She finally found the courage to meet Yu's eyes. "Have you ever had a girlfriend?" Although Yu seemed like a very friendly person, his aura of distant propriety was quite apparent as well. He smiled and didn't respond. The actress chattered on anyway. "A friend once told me that if you've been in a relationship before, if you really can't get into the scene, you can close your eyes and try to think of your lover." Henry, just in the middle of the road. It does kind of sound like that. I'm sure that he pulls the car over. Yu said very gently, "Okay, thank you." The actress blinked, blushing slightly. The time they'd been given passed very quickly. The two of them chatted about nothing of consequence for a little longer. Then the director called for the official start of the first take. The beginning of the scene was focused on the actress's monologue. She had no problems with this section and put on a passionate performance. As she spoke, she began to weep, and was crying so hard by the end that her words were completely choked with sobs. Falling rain drummed against the windows as Yu pulled up the handbrake and coldly turned toward her. "Are you finished? Let me out of the car. I want to leave." She unbuckled her seatbelt and went to open the door, but Yu locked it without a word and pulled her back. "You really hate me this much? Do you really have to treat me in this way?" The actress cried, "I'm a mother. I have a husband and children, and my husband is your rival. Do you know how painful these past few days have been for me? Can't you spare me, and spare yourself too?" "You don't love your husband at all," said Yu. "Your marriage was a mistake from the very beginning. That much should be clear to you." The woman didn't listen to him. She wept as she kept trying to pry open the car door, saying quietly, "I have to go back. If you insist on leaving, I'll have him killed at once. But if you stay with me, I'll allow him to linger at death's door for a while longer. You better sit down. If you dare get out of this car and go back to him, I'll run you over right here and now." Startled and angry, the actress stared into her lover's face in disbelief, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Why are you doing this? You're a complete madman." "Cut." The director interrupted them. Qian, your emotions here aren't right. Qian Qian was the name of her character. The director usually called the actors by their characters' names to help them immerse themselves in the role. The actress slowly pulled herself back to reality, wiped her tears, and obediently listened to the director's feedback with an open mind. Unfortunately, the director was a pedantic and showy intellectual with a heavy Fujian accent, while the actress was a northerner. It took quite a bit of effort for them to communicate, like a chicken trying to hold a conversation with a duck. In the end, He Yu got the gist of what the director meant. "Let me," he said. He turned to the actress. "Jie, did you have any issues with your lines?" "I didn't." "You see," He Yu said very patiently, "the screenplay says you're very confused and hurt, but at your core, you're a strong-willed and clever person. When you mentioned breaking up, my reaction wasn't outside your expectations. Even though you were a bit shocked that I said something as extreme as, 'If you leave, I'll kill you,' you've seen me kill many people before and are perfectly aware of how ruthless I am. So your degree of shock actually shouldn't be that high." But just now, that's exactly how I tried to play it," the actress said. Perhaps the issue lay in how Northerners and Southerners tended to display a different level of intensity in their personalities. After thinking it over, He Yu spoke briefly to the director through his microphone. Then he said to the actress, "Wait here for a moment. I'm going to the tent to ask him about the specifics." The actress chimed in. "Then I'll also—" "Just sit." He Yu closed the car door for her. Even though she had an assistant to help her, the rain was currently too heavy, and her nightdress was too long and unwieldy. It'd be a nuisance if she got mud on it. "I'll go," he said. He Yu returned to the director's tent. The creative director and his crew were all sitting in front of the screens. Xie Qingcheng was in the furthest corner, his expression unreadable. He Yu glanced at Xie Qingcheng, but it wasn't the time for flirting. I'm glad that he realizes that. Quickly turning his attention to the director and Hu Yi, he spent some time discussing something with them in hushed whispers. All three of them worked behind the scenes and were attuned to nuances in language, so the discussion wasn't frustrating in the least. He Yu wrapped up their talk quickly and was about to return to the set, but his hand hadn't even touched the insulated curtain when someone lifted that curtain from the outside and stepped in. It was Chen Man, who was with Group B today at a nearby location. Having run into He Yu, young Master Chen shot him a smile, while He Yu indifferently sized him up, his gaze finally landing on the takeout caddy of warm drinks that he was carrying. "Xiaga's stomach isn't all that good, and it's way too cold out here, so I bought some warm milk. We're wrapping things up over there." Chen Man was impatient by nature, while He Yu was silent, so Chen Man ended up explaining the situation like a rapid-firing machine gun. Then he turned and walked, with a slightly bent back, to Xie Qingcheng's side. "Go, here, to help you warm up." He Yu turned to glance at them. Xie Qingcheng also seemed surprised by Chen Man's arrival, but he couldn't resist the allure of warm drinks and took the paper cup that Chen Man handed him. "The straws are here," said Chen Man quietly. "How much longer do you guys have?" "We've just started. You can head back on your own." "It's okay. I'll wait for you." Even though he spoke in a low voice, He Yu heard everything with perfect clarity. There was a soft rustling noise. He Yu had suddenly dropped the insulated curtain, no longer intending to leave. He turned back to the director and said something softly into his ear, with his eyes lowered. The director was a bit surprised. "Are you sure? I deliberately cleared out the area." "The lighting crew is still there," He Yu said calmly. "So a few more doesn't matter. You have to look at the screen, so you can't leave, but Professor Xie and the others should watch on site. That way, if a problem arises, we can make adjustments faster and have better outcomes." Their savior was genuinely thinking of the quality of the performance. The director was greatly moved. He agreed to the request, and thus got up and turned around, pointing out the individuals that He Yu had requested to go and watch the scene on site. "Wu Laoshi, Xiaozhang, Professor Xie, head over to the set with He Yu for a bit." Xie Qingcheng raised his head, his gaze moving past Chenman and landing on where He Yu was busy putting on airs. He Yu actually seemed fairly indifferent. He didn't look at Xie Qingcheng at all, even though his expression seemed to give off a hint of malice. Yes, he was making it very clear that he wouldn't allow Chenman and Xie Qingcheng to sit together. Assistant Zhang and Hu Laoshe had already risen to their feet, and finally, Xie Qingcheng straightened up as well. Xie Qingcheng had already sensed He Yu's provocative demeanor. He knew he was deliberately making trouble for him. He didn't want to involve Chenman, and more importantly, he didn't want He Yu to say anything inflammatory in front of Chenman. He turned to the man and, barely moving his lips, said, "You should just head back." And then, bringing up the rear, he followed He Yu, who didn't even spare him a backward glance, to the site of the outdoor sex scene. So then, this chapter, that's the end of the chapter, this chapter being called You Watch Me Put on a Performance. It's not even about the sex scene yet. It's about the performances that He Yu is always putting on to seem, polite in front of everybody. So there's one more chapter for today. And it has a sort of, scary sounding title. We're on page 305 for chapter 80. You heard me share our secrets. Excuse me. The rain was pouring down at the outdoor shooting location. The crew had set up a tarp for people to stand under to avoid being rained on. Luckily, not many people were still on set, so it wasn't that crowded. He Yu got back into the car and relayed the results of their discussion to the actress. We deleted part of a line. Which one? He pointed at the script in her hand. This one. The actress read the line out loud. Why are you doing this? You're a complete madman. Right. You only need to say the last sentence, He Yu said. There shouldn't be too many emotional ups and downs, and your voice should be a bit softer. Change the surprise to despondency. You failed to communicate with your lover, and he can't understand your suffering. Give it a try. The actress mulled over the line, mumbling under her breath. Then she looked at He Yu and said softly, You're a complete madman. He Yu nodded and spoke through his microphone. Director, let's try it again. This take was much smoother. It still wasn't an 80 or 90-point performance, but the two of them carried out the emotionally charged conversation to an acceptable standard, at least. The actress was taken aback. After the director called for another cut, she asked He Yu, How did you know that approaching it this way would work? Have you acted in this kind of scene before? I haven't. So then how? I've met someone with this kind of attitude before. He Yu paused, casting his gaze slightly to the side to land on Xie Qingcheng, who was standing behind the light reflector. Xie Qingcheng's face was completely devoid of expression, as if he hadn't even watched the performance. His head was lowered as he fiddled with his phone. Chances are he was texting Chenman. He Yu withdrew his gaze, his gloominess intensifying. After regrouping briefly, they began to work on the second part of the scene. This part was the sex scene. This car sex scene was to be filmed in one continuous shot. After being firmly rejected by Ai Qian again, He Yu's character would be furious, and the two of them would begin to struggle. Under his provocation, Ai Qian lost control of her emotions, and in the midst of their pushing and shoving, He Yu would find himself unable to restrain the violent and possessive urges in his heart. He would lean down, press her against the passenger's seat, and forcibly kiss her. The kiss would then intensify, escalating into the car sex scene. The performance began. You have no idea who you're messing with. Before the camera, He Yu lifted his almond eyes with an air of malice. I can have you and leave you whenever I want. What do you think you are to me? The young man's acting was raw and inexperienced, but with a predatory expression on his face. His aura was just right. He leaned over and fixed his gaze on her, his lips opening and closing. Chenmon is the anti-Shimei of this. I Chin. There's nothing you haven't done with me. How ridiculous of you to pull this chaste maiden act now. Shut up. The actress adopted the mood He had described to her. She remained even-keeled, suppressing her anger and expressing mostly calm and hurt. This kind of mood was just right. It drew He into the scene. He looked down and smiled. I'm deigning to show interest in a married woman with 3 kids. You are being way too ungrateful. Stop talking. You know perfectly well that you can't go back to how it used to be with your husband. I've already defiled you. This is my final decision. No matter what happens, I won't regret it. Do you even have the right to make this choice? The wind and rain gusted ominously as Hyu's eyes darkened, surging with a turbulent undercurrent. Then, before the woman could respond, with a cigarette held between his fingers, he pressed his hand against the back of the seat and lowered it, before suddenly leaning down and kissing her roughly. The actress's eyes flew wide open. Cut. The director's voice blared through the microphone. Qian, the feeling still isn't quite right. Let's discuss it some more. This director was insanely nitpicky. Hyu let go of the actress and gave her some time to speak with the director. Then he turned his face to the side, lifting that pair of beautiful almond eyes, still tinged with his character's crazed darkness, to shoot Xie Qingcheng another subtle glance. Xie Qingcheng still wasn't looking at him. The lines in the movie were so sordid, portraying such a twisted love. Hyu's lover in the scene was also married, and their relationship was just as messy. When he was acting, though his eyes were fixed on the actress, his mind was filled with the way Xie Qingcheng looked in bed. But it seemed like Xie Qingcheng was completely unwilling to acknowledge this, not even willing to spare Hyu half a glance. All the time and energy he'd spent on his performance had been in vain, as he hadn't been able to provoke a single ripple of emotion in that man's heart. Hyu was feeling unwell. The actress was still talking to the director, so he went ahead and got out of the car, slamming the door shut behind him. He stuck his hands in his pockets as he stepped out into the downpour, the expression on his face somewhere between his own and the young crime boss he was playing. His aura was like a soft sword or a whip. It might not appear too rigid or cold, but anyone could tell if he hardened his heart, the results would be lethally bloody. Everyone watching became a little uneasy. He ducked beneath the rain tarp and gave Hu Yi a courteous nod. Hu Laoshe said, "Does young Master He have any other questions?" With everyone looking on, Hu Yu smiled and said, "I'm a little uncertain of the correct mindset I should have, so I'm looking to chat with Professor Xie." There were too many people here, but the rain was also coming down too hard. If it wasn't for the rain, he would have definitely found an excuse to pull Xie Qingcheng into the cover of the nearby reeds that were as tall as a man, and fiercely kiss his ice-cold lips to unleash the resentment blazing in his heart. How dare he not watch him? But now, there was nothing he could do. If he pulled someone into that bank of reeds in the pouring rain right in front of everyone, he might as well have borrowed a loudspeaker and yelled, "Hello, everybody. I'd like to announce that I'm having a fling with this person." He could only stand before Xie Qingcheng beneath this tarp, surrounded by people in the anxious pitter-pattering of unceasing rain, and stare into his eyes as he asked him with gentle poise, "Professor Xie, what do you think? Did I get the feeling right in my performance just now?" There was an awkward silence. Everyone around Xie Qingcheng knew that he hadn't been watching the scene at all. Xie Qingcheng had a very strong sense of responsibility. He provided very thorough guidance on all the other scenes he'd been assigned to supervise, never missing the smallest details of their performances. The others thought that perhaps Xie Qingcheng had something keeping him busy today, so he needed to be on his phone when Hyu was performing. What a stroke of bad luck that young Master He went over to personally ask him about his acting. How would he respond? Xie Qingcheng lifted his lashes and looked at Hyu calmly. "I didn't watch your performance." Everybody was speechless. How blunt of him. Hu smiled and lowered his head. Professor Xie, the director asked you to guide me. Is this how you intend to guide me? During our previous conversation, the feelings you described were all correct, so I didn't think it was necessary, Xie Qingcheng said. I don't think there's any further need for me to continue standing here. Heyu's smile disappeared. He stared at Xie Qingcheng fixedly with his pitch-black almond eyes. Please continue standing here. I won't have confidence if you're not here. Regardless of who may be waiting for you tonight, please ask them to head back first. You should be watching me. Hu added menacingly. I told you before. I can only immerse myself in this role if you're standing here. What he wanted to say was, no matter who I'm acting out a sex scene with, the person I'll be thinking of fucking will always be you. With all the people around them right now, he couldn't say that. But how could Xie Qingcheng possibly miss the meaning behind his words? Xie Qingcheng watched Hu bite his lip in silence after he finished speaking, his sharp canines peeking out and unsheathing a sinister cunning that, due to the angle, went unseen by everyone else. Even though this conversation seemed to be overstepping some emotional boundaries, after giving it some thought, the listeners concluded that Xie Qingcheng must have mentioned something to Hu when they were psychoanalyzing these characters, and now Hu needed Xie Qingcheng to be present in order to remember what had been said and express the right mood. They didn't give it any further thought. The director's lackey Xiao Zhang figured it was something like that, so he reminded Xie Qingcheng to stop looking at his phone and pay careful attention to Hu's performance to check for anything that needed to be corrected. They started the scene from the top once again. When Hu returned to the car, the actress seemed to be in a rather helpless state. She and the director still weren't on the same wavelength. This whole time, the director had been trying to show her where she was missing the mark in this sex scene. You need to think about what exactly you're trying to express here. The actress was nervous to begin with, working with such a big-shot director. Seeing that he was getting angry, she felt even more at a loss. I need to express surprise. She only dared to say what was written in the script. Upon returning and seeing her state of distress, Hu thought for a bit and said, Jie, try turning your head away. This goes for when we're acting out the sex scene later on too. But you should be resisting me with everything you've got. Don't worry about me. You can even bite me if you want. He paused, then added, but your resistance isn't completely out of hatred. In your heart, you actually love this man very much. Do you understand? He once again encouraged her not to be nervous. The director gave the two of them some time to settle into the right mood and discuss the details of the performance. When the cameras started rolling again, the director reaped an unexpected harvest. Perhaps because Hu was studying screenwriting and directing, he was far more astute, daring, and uninhibited than most actors his age, who only had experience in front of the camera. After receiving some advice and guidance, the actress's performance also gradually moved onto the right track. Quarreling, weeping, bit by bit, the atmosphere heated up. Hu's menacing voice emerged unhurriedly from his microphone as he advanced on his quarry step by step. Under his coercion, the actress went from willfully cool-headed to indignant, and then from indignant to hurt. Their conversation stirred up a formless maelstrom in the air, slowly pulling in the gazes of all the staff members whose thoughts had initially been elsewhere. Xie Qingcheng was also watching indifferently from a corner. Never mind Hu specifically coming over to tell him to stop playing with his phone. The atmosphere right now was much too arresting, and with everyone around him so captivated, it would seem very strange if he made a point to look away. From his angle, he couldn't see Hu himself, but the video camera's small screen was visible. The youth's profile on the display was like a dark cloud descending from the skies above, pressing the actress into a corner until she had nowhere left to go. When Hu lowered his head, the actress abruptly turned away, only for him to grab her by the jaw and force her face back toward him even more viciously. The woman closed her eyes in pain and let out a muffled groan, but He Yu didn't take notice as he braced his hand against the seat. The cigarette between his fingers had burned all the way down to the end, but he pinched it out without blinking, as if he didn't feel the searing pain at all. Then, looking at the actress's face that he had forcibly turned toward himself, he leaned down and kissed her again. The hormonal tension nearly pierced through the screen. It was utterly silent on set, as if the air itself had started to congeal. He Yu controlled himself very well as he kissed the actress, with only their lips coming into contact. It wasn't actually a French kiss, but he kept shifting positions as if he were pressing in deeper, making it look like an extremely intimate entanglement to the onlookers. A heavy sense of passion emanated from the screen. The microphones picked up the actress's feeble, anguished voice. It was difficult to tell if the emotion in her voice was a performance, or if there was some real feeling in it. Many of the crew members' faces turned red as they watched. The screenwriter and the director exchanged a knowing look. They couldn't have hoped for a better atmosphere to make the audience's hearts race. Although the actors' clothes were merely disheveled rather than fully removed, the flames had been sufficiently stoked. By the time He Yu let go of the actress at the end of the scene, her eyes were glazed over and her reddened mouth fell slightly open. As she lay back against the leather seat, it was as though her body had turned to softened clay. But just as the director was about to yell cut, unable to stand watching any longer, she remembered who and where she was. Although her body was still trembling, she suddenly tensed up, and the look in her eyes immediately turned despairing and ice-cold. In those eyes, which still held some residual desire, there peered a mournful sadness, accompanied by some of the actress's own genuine pain at how late she'd caught her mistake. On the monitors, it seemed reasonable to think that her panic belonged to the character. Looking at the actress's beautiful, tearful eyes through the lens, the director thought, seeing as they'd already filmed it to this point and could definitely use some of the footage, and given that it was very difficult to perform such an emotionally heavy scene in a single continuous shot, he might as well let them continue. He stopped himself from calling, "Cut." The actress slowly regained her bearings and gazed at He Yu in humiliation. "If you treat me like this, I'll hate you to death." He Yu was acting according to the script. At this point, his character's anger was supposed to pass while his sense of reason returned. Seeing the person he liked with that kind of expression on her face, his heart was to suddenly ache with unexpected regret. At a loss for what to do with himself, he tried to wipe her tears, but she slapped his hand away. "Oh, thank you, Henry." He Yu let his hand fall. "I'm sorry. Don't hate me." "Okay, cut. That's all for this take. Adjust the camera positions. Actors, take a break. We'll start the second take shortly." Each scene needed to be filmed from many different angles, so they were never actually finished after only one take. Even if the footage was usable, they would record a few more takes to make the editing process easier. In a little while, they would have to do it again. He Yu got up and took a tissue from an assistant, which he passed to the actress. He'd controlled himself very well. Even though there were some emotions he couldn't completely suppress, they stemmed from his personal experience and had nothing to do with the actress. He had immersed himself completely in the absurd things he and Xie Qingcheng had done together. He really wanted to see what kind of reaction Xie Qingcheng would have this time. After pulling on a shirt, he walked under the tarp, only to find a rather infuriating result. Xie Qingcheng had indeed watched him, but at that moment, he was smoking in the corner with a bland expression on his face, as though He Yu's performance hadn't affected him in the least. How could he be so unmoved? How could he still be so unmoved? He Yu didn't care what the other crew members thought, but he could sense the emotional reactions from them, men and women alike. They were restless, embarrassed, anxious, or flustered, and some didn't dare meet his eyes. A large part of why he had thrown himself into this kiss scene was because he wanted to act it out for Xie Qingcheng to see. Everyone else was affected. Only he had no reaction at all. Professor Xie smoked his cigarette, every exhale blurring his outline like the changeable moods of an April day. He seemed like a celestial being, impossible to make out, hidden within the clouds and mist. He Yu's fury had more or less reached its peak. Since Xie Qingcheng didn't spare him a single glance, he simply grabbed a tissue to wipe his mouth and remained silent with a grim expression on his face. He typically had an approachable air and gently beautiful looks, but acting the part of a youthful, deranged crime boss allowed him to behave more like his real self. Right now, with the excuse of getting into character, he could write the words, "I'm sick, stay away from me," all over his face without reservation. The people around him didn't dare to speak or even approach. An assistant passed him water with bated breath, and he lifted his head to drink it, but he didn't feel all that thirsty. He just rinsed out his mouth and then sat down on a plastic chair, reading the script for the upcoming scenes with a gloomy aura. People hadn't shaken off the atmosphere of the scene. Apart from the sound of the rain, it was so silent one could hear a pin drop. He Yu kept loudly flipping through the script. Suddenly, with a surge of uncontrollable malice, he slammed the book shut. "Can you stop smoking?" That furious reprimand came out of nowhere, causing everyone to flinch with fright. The only people smoking were the director's special assistant Xiao Zhang and Xie Qingcheng. Xiao Zhang had smoked before, but He Yu hadn't said a thing, enduring it as best he could. Any clever mind could immediately tell the target of his dissatisfaction. Several people turned to look at Xie Qingcheng. Xie Qingcheng didn't want to waste breath on him. Sometimes, a calm reply could be more effective than getting angry, so he stubbed out his cigarette, paused, and replied blandly to He Yu. "My apologies." He Yu whipped his head back around and continued reading the script, never looking at him again. He Yu is just mad at Xie Qingcheng not paying attention to him, and he was like, "Could you stop smoking?" And Xie Qingcheng was just like, "All right, my bad." In this atmosphere, more crushingly oppressive than the pressure of the abyssal sea, the cameras were quickly set up in their new positions. Xiao Zhang let out a sigh of relief. "All right, come back everyone. We're moving on to the second take." And so, the second take began. This one was more intense than the previous take. Due to the brutally primal atmosphere that emanated from the drama, entrapping the actress deep within its mire, she acted well above her usual level and gave a deeply moving performance. Meanwhile, as He Yu kissed her before the camera, though his feigned movements were just as well executed as before, he seemed even more infatuated than in the previous take. It was as if he'd made up his mind that regardless of whether that person was watching, he was going to act as gut-wrenchingly as possible. In the latter half of the scene, they broke apart, panting heavily. The actress clutched at his clothes, twin tear tracks streaming down from the outer corners of her eyes. She choked with emotion. Her final line in the scene was, "If you treat me like this, I'll hate you to death." But her heart had melted from the kiss. She kept swallowing, the words catching awkwardly in her throat as she repeated "I" a number of times, unable to finish. Furious, the director sighed alongside all the others watching the monitors, slapping the table. It seemed there was no way to continue, so he might as well call cut. But just at that very moment, He Yu suddenly picked up the scene from the line she dropped, acting out a response that was filled with hatred and fury, yet tinged with panic and timidity. He looked down at her with a completely different gaze than before. "That's fine," he said in despair and passion, like an obstinate moth flinging itself into an open flame, cold yet deranged. "Then from now on, just loathe me, despise me, and hate me." Xie Qingcheng was standing close by beneath the tarp, where not even the pouring rain outside could drown out He Yu's voice. So he heard those words. Xie Qingcheng, who had stayed calm through the entire evening, finally froze upon hearing He Yu say those words out loud. That got him. Interesting. Oh, okay, yes. The first night they had plunged into the abyss, He Yu had bent down and said something similar into his ear. Shock and fury engulfed his entire body like wildfire. If that's what gets him, does that mean that Xie Qingcheng does not hate He Yu? He's like, I don't want to hate you. I'm still, like, he's trying to keep his distance, and everything He Yu is doing is horrible. But Xie Qingcheng is still like, I don't hate you. You just need to, you know, stay away from me. And, like, kind of like, I still want you to get better. You know, I don't know. That's kind of, I'm kind of wondering, like, okay, why is that what gets him? Shock and fury engulfed his entire body like wildfire. Oh, okay. He Yu was airing out a closely guarded secret that only the two of them knew in front of so many people. Oh, because he said the same thing. Okay. Xie Qingcheng stared at the monitor. The eyes of the youth on the screen were ruthless, stained with the madness of someone who cared nothing for the consequences of their actions, just as he had been that absurd night Xie Qingcheng sought to bury deep into the recesses of his memories. He Yu was still going. As if he had made up his mind to take Xie Qingcheng down with him, he repeated another line he'd said on that night of madness. All this time, there's never been anyone who loved me for real. At least in the future, there'll be someone who hates me passionately. That would be good, too. Silence fell over the set. These altered lines were truly shocking, the depth of their emotion utterly terrifying. The director stared in a daze for a long time before suddenly breaking into applause. Excellent. Cut. He Yu took a moment to gather himself. Slanting his gaze to the side, he stared into the camera with a piercing expression in his eyes, as though trying to stab through the lens into a certain observer's heart. The scene soon wrapped up. Exceedingly pleased with this bit of improvisation, Hu Yi slung an arm around He Yu's shoulders with a smile and proceeded to subject him to a non-stop stream of chatter. Now that he was finished with his performance, He Yu's face reverted to its usual impassive appearance. Lifting his long eyelashes, he returned to the director's tent. As he carefully observed the results of the day's shoot before the monitors, he casually swept his gaze over the crew members standing present. Then he paused, his eyes darkening. Xie Qingcheng was gone. He scanned the entire tent, but there was no sign of Xie Qingcheng's silhouette. At some point in time, he had left, disappearing into the downpour. Well, that's the end of the chapter. That's where we stop for today. So, you want to know what the next chapter is called? When we come back on Monday, we will be on chapter 81, which is called I Kissed You in the Rain. We're back to shenanigans again. Every time, like, this is not really a cliffhanger, but I'm just like, ugh, we have to wait until Monday? At least we don't have to wait until, Wednesday, but still, we have to wait. I don't want to wait. I want to read this right now, but I can't. Psychine, I think it's interesting how invested in acting and directing he actually is. Yes, I was thinking about that, like, last stream, because it occurred to me the reason he's in this program to begin with is just because Xie Shui was teaching a screenwriting class. Like, at least from what we could tell, this didn't seem to be, like, his actual passion. But maybe it's because, like, he always has to put on an act in front of people that just makes him really good at it. And because he's putting on performances, like, for the benefit of other people, he's sort of, like... We have the situation where he wants a certain reaction out of Xie Qingcheng. So it kind of makes him, like, extra passionate about acting. And so it's interesting, because I wasn't expecting that. I thought he just, like, didn't care, and he wasn't really going to get into it. But it's like, he's doing it. He's doing the work. So that was today, and I will see you on Monday for I Kissed You in the Rain. Wait, hold on. This chapter title, the wording, is it different? No. Okay. Sex scene. For a second, I couldn't remember if the chapter titles were addressed, like, to Xie Ching Chong as in, like, you, or if they typically were written, like, he did this and he did this. Because I thought some previous chapter titles were like, oh yeah, no, wait, yeah, wait, that's interesting. Okay, so earlier chapter titles are like, for example, I asked him out to a movie, but then we have you watched me put on a performance. You heard me share our secrets. I kissed you in the rain. Meat bun. I see that you're doing something with that. I'm going to be thinking about what that means. So yeah, I will see y'all on Monday. Have a good one. Bye.